Welcome back to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Lawrence Conley. Lawrence, welcome to the show. How are you?
It's great to be here. I'm doing well, you know. Doing Dalkeith, talking Celtic.
Talking Celtic. It's good to see you sporting the hoops as well. Straight to the questions coming in via Facebook. This is going out live on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. We're asking the question, why can't Celtic produce our own prolific striker? If you add up the amount of millions we've spent over the last even 20 years on strikers, and you even look at the success rate of these signings, why can't we produce our own? That's the big question that I'd like to ask today. And we've already got a good point coming in from Gary Doonan, who is a regular contributor to the Bulletin on a Celtic State of Mind. Gary, only two of note in the past 40 years, Charlie Nicholas and Jerry Craney. Jerry could have been a great Celtic striker if times different at Celtic then. Maloney was a striker but really made his name as an inside left 4 years after his debut. Now, I agree with every single word of that. We've been going on a fair bit on the podcast about this subject, and we were trying to think, well, we had Charlie Nicholas coming through. That's your era, Lawrence. You've seen him. Anyone who didn't see Nicholas, talk to us about the impact that he made when he came through as a kid.
It was just a goal machine. It was like, bang. You know, he was a superstar from his first season. He was just so good. You know, was it 50 goals one season? It was amazing.
It was dynamite, wasn't it?
Yeah. His footwork, the skill, you know, he could score from anywhere really, couldn't he? You know, head, feet, anything. It was unbelievable. You hear Frank McGarvey chatting about Charlie and say, because a lot of Celtic fans will give stick for Nicholas leaving, but McGarvey's like, well, if you were 8 times your wages or something he was offered, you know, it was kind of the old board wouldn't pay a going rate.
They wouldn't.
You know, and Charlie's kind of a young boy and going, well, you can get 8 times your wages. What are you going to do? Because it wasn't superstar money then. You know, it wasn't like it was on 10 grand and going to 80 grand. I think it was on £300 or £400 a week.
Yep.
You know, so it was like £300 or £400 a week, only just over 3 grand. It was
a young player coming through at that time, Lawrence. The wages, albeit higher than probably your average working man's wage. You look at, in Davy Hayes' book, he's talking about even a few years later than that, 85, 86, the average wages were about 300 quid in the Celtic team, right?
Yep.
The English league's always been richer. This isn't a new phenomenon. You know, it's got even greater riches now with the broadcasting deals, etc. But it was always richer. You go back to Davy Hay as a player, he was able to get a much bigger wage by going to Chelsea.
Yep.
But the issue that developed with the Charlie Nicholas scenario was Celtic fans felt as though they felt let down by Charlie. And when he come back up to play a few times in friendly games or testimonials, he didn't get a great reception initially. But having spoken to, and I know the view of Charlie now is probably different because they're looking at Charlie as a pundit rather than that exciting young player that came through. I spoke to Kevin McKenna. The YouTube interview is still up there. Brilliant interview from Kevin, who obviously worked at the Celtic View. He spoke to Charlie Nicholas directly, and Charlie wasn't pushing for a move in 83. Yep. You know, the Celtic board were pushing for a move. They'd never seen 750 grand before, and they wanted to see it. And so Nicholas leaves. That's the 80s. We didn't really have a prolific goal scorer coming through ranks. We had guys like Brian McClare coming through. The one who shall not be named. He was quite prolific. And then you go into McAvenny, but these are guys we're buying.
Andy Walker,
we bought him in from Motherwell. So we're buying the goals. And at the moment, we're buying the goals. Our main striker's a £9 million striker.
Yep.
His backup, or the second striker, is a £5 million striker. The 1990s, not the best era for Celtic, but Jerry Craney probably is the prolific goal scorer that we brought through the ranks, isn't he? The only one.
Yeah, 90s, I'm trying to think who else was playing. Obviously, somebody we bought in, Tommy Coyne, who was vastly underrated.
I did like Tommy Coyne.
Great goal return for Tommy. Mm-hmm. Andy Payton, phenomenal goal return. No, you know, I thought it's almost 1 and 2 with Andy Payton, isn't it? And I think that's everywhere he's went.
Yeah,
it's not just
he's always
Celtic.
Had that consistency.
He's always, you know, and letting him go. who else? Well, Jakanowski, obviously the Polish connection.
Started off well, Lawrence, and then obviously discovered Victoria's.
Yeah, and a certain female interviewer as well. And
you remember that when
Hazel Irvine.
They were presenting the birthday cake to Jakanowski, and he wouldn't let them in the house. Aye, interesting times. So the 90s, Jerry Craney, again, people might look back on Jerry. I look back on Jerry's time because I'm going to the games at that point. Celtic weren't in a great place. He came through, scored a lot of important goals.
Definitely, yeah.
Goals against Rangers, European goals against Sporting Lisbon, Borussia Dortmund.
Prolific as well, I'd say Simon Donnelly. His second season they didn't score at all, but his first season when he broke in, I think, was it Wraith Rovers, scores his debut. Then it was buying him in that season. But I think he suffered in the first half of the Hampden season. He was the only striker we had that was fit. So there was a lot of pressure put on. I think he was 19, going, you're leading the line for Celtic. And we couldn't drop him in and out because we didn't have another striker. And that was until, I think, Pierre signed, was it December, January, scored against Hearts.
He came in, I think that game was in the November of the Hampden season. The 1-1 game against Hearts, that's when we were crying out for a striker, weren't we? And I think after that, certainly in Simon's third season, he was pushed more out wide right because we had McNamara by then.
But with Jackie, Andy Tom came in. You know, so you were looking at the striking options kind of went up a level, didn't they?
We're buying them.
Davy Hay, what a scout.
Oh,
he brought in Van Hondon, Cadetti.
Andy Tom,
DeCanio, Andy Tom.
Yes.
You know, you were looking at the players that Davy Hay brought in were certainly high calibre. But yeah, you know, was it easier to buy? Probably, because I think we don't give people time.
But we had a great tradition, Lawrence, of creating and developing our own strikers. You could go right back. I mean, we look at the greatest Celtic team of all time. There's not a player in the greatest Celtic 11 of all time that was voted some time ago that is pre-dating the European Cup win. But if you go back and you've got your Jimmy Quinns and you've got your Jimmy McGrory's, St Roch's to Celtic, but we were developing strikers. And then since Craney, and people might laugh because of the times that Craney played in, but he was a prolific goal scoring striker. We've not produced any.
But if you go back to McGrory, so he was St Roch, Celtic, Clydebank, then back. Although I think he had poor goal return in his first 20 games. But who would get that kind of time just now?
No, you wouldn't get 20 games to prove yourself, would you?
No. But then he gets it and goes on to be a best goal scorer ever, and arguably the greatest goal scorer ever in world football. So you're kind of looking going, well, and you can see the reason we can't give time, because I think just now, I don't think there's been a more consistent period of Celtic having to win every game. You know, you can't drop points now. You just can't. Whereas before you could go, right, we can take 3 or 4 losses a season, not a problem. Now it's kind of out of question. So I think it goes back to time. Even you read Lubo's book, he didn't really develop. He was like 23 as a player.
You don't get time.
You wouldn't get time
nowadays. And that again veers into another debate that we've had on the podcast that's probably going to continue about the development in the reserve league, the development leagues, the Colts, and how, you know, a young kid's going to have to make an impact. And I guess what brought this back to my mind was reading again this morning that Jack Aitchison might be on his way out the club, and thinking back to that day 4 years ago now where he became the youngest ever goal scorer
and player.
You know, at that time, absolutely. I mean, we had Roy Aitken was 16, and then was it Mark Fotheringham?
Fotheringham was,
John Kennedy was for a spell.
So that was William McStay. But when he was brought through Fotheringham, a lot of young players at that time William McStay, didn't he? You know, you were kind of looking and going,
That was it was all Willie McStay's boys that played against Dundee United in Larson's comeback game, game of the season. Kenny Dalglish's last game in charge, wasn't it? But yeah, so he became the youngest player, youngest goal scorer, and he's had a spell down south. He's had a spell going out and loan up here. It's not really happened for him, and it looks as though he's leaving. He's going to Barnsley. By all accounts.
I mean, he seemed to spark at Forest Green. Initial really well, and then fell away. Was it 20 odd games? 6 assists, 5 goals or something.
Started off well, and I think they changed his position, to be fair to the boy. I think he was playing off-centre in the second half of his campaign there. But he started off well. I'm looking at it, Celtic have got a fantastic system set up in terms of youth development. I'm not criticising that. You look at the team that we're playing just now consistently, and before then, when Tierney was in that side, and if you've got 3 or 4 homegrown players, you're doing okay. In modern football, you're doing well, you know. And Celtic have that. We've got that. And so I'm not criticising the system. But I'm asking the question, why can't we produce another goal scorer?
I think strikers get less time because you need to score. You need to win games. You don't do it without goals. And I think strikers generally get less time in any other position. I think it comes down to that. What we've obviously touched before, there's no reserve league. There's no reinstatement to the juniors. It's where do these guys get time to develop?
You're right.
You know, if they're any good, we want to keep them. But invariably they sit on the bench for 2 years and they miss out 2 years development. So you're kind of going, right, we need to find a way of developing them. And as it's saying, the 5 best young players we can't keep, we need to loan them out straight away because it's more invaluable for them to get a season under their belt than 3 or 4 part-time games with us.
You're right. What my concern is also, Lawrence, is you've got these players who, because of the lack of games, are not developing, let's say, from the age of 18 to 21. You've got the other side of that, where the guys with the real huge promise going elsewhere. We spoke about it last week. They're going to Blackburn, they're going to Bayern Munich.
Oh, Bayern, yeah.
You know?
I mean, there's a number went to Bayern. But you can see that. If you want to develop your career, you go, Celtic's youth system's brilliant. There's such a huge chasm between the youth system and the first team.
Yes.
And how do we fill it? You know, I think Tommy Burns used to do some development games, you know, you bring over Bayern or whoever, you know, some glamour European ties. You can go, well, at least they were played at a higher tempo. You can really, we need to kind of develop these guys. And hats off to Lenny, he does give young guys a chance, but I think strikers we just need to win every game now. And strikers just don't get the time. You'll get time in midfield, you get time in defence, but up front you just don't get that time.
We've seen through the periods, you know, Forrest coming through, Callum McGregor, the aforementioned Kieran Tierney coming through. There's a few good youngsters just under the surface we've seen, you know, playing in the first team.
Yep.
And when we're talking about the left back scenario, nobody ever says to me, what about, you know, Daniel Church or whoever the youth player is at playing like that? What about him? Because we fall into that trap, Lawrence. We know we don't have the time. We need to get somebody in who's a ready-made player.
Yep.
So on the one hand, I'm thinking, why aren't we producing a striker? But on the other hand, we're the first to complain if the guy doesn't hit the ground running.
Oh, yeah, don't hit the ground running or we drop points in a game. You know, I think we lose perspective a lot of the time. And such a sustained period of success and such a high win ratio, I think we lose all perspective of, right, it was a draw, it was a loss. You know, whereas if you get through the 90s or the 80s, you're kind of going, well, we could lose more games there, we could drop more points and still win a league. Especially 80s, you were looking and going, you could develop players then. You had the reserve league, they could play, you know, first team players coming back for injury, they could play alongside him. Similarly, they're playing against the good standards because the other teams all had, you know, decent reserve teams.
Yep.
And we just don't, there's a huge gap there in it. You can't, it'd be brilliant to bring back the reserve league, but I think we need to admit that's not happening. Other clubs aren't up for it.
They're not going to do it. You'd maybe get 4 or 5 clubs who you know who had an appetite for that, Lawrence, and that's the problem. Would a cross-border situation be possible at that level?
You can go cross-border, but I think you're looking at, is there a team in the lower divisions where we can say, right, these are our best 5 players, just loan them out. Yeah, we could do with them on the bench, but in reality they're going to get less than 300 minutes game time with us. Why don't we put them in and we'll get a season worth of football?
That's why it was good to have Danny Lennon in last week. We spoke to Danny about the pros and cons of a club like Celtic. Let's say 4 players, for argument's sake, Lawrence, who are not going to be in the first team, but you want them to develop beyond, let's say, under 18 level. You give them to a club like Clyde. And he was talking about some of the youngsters that he's brought in. That was an exclusive, apparently. It hadn't been released, but he mentioned it on the podcast. So I think he's got a kid in from Rangers. And there's a deal. Obviously, there's a deal to be struck because Clyde won't pay wages under certain scenarios or circumstances, and then they'll pay wages if the guy does play, etc. So they pay wages if he doesn't play. Aye, so that it puts them into a situation where it's worth their while to play them. Danny was saying that they're in a financial standing where they can afford not to play the guy and pay the wages. But again, I do know for a fact that Celtic were in discussions with Dunfermline Athletic not that long ago to set up not an affiliation or a nursery scheme, but send them 4 or 5 players every season. Let them develop.
Yeah, definitely. I think you need to do that. You know, we're not going to put them. Well, there's no reinstatement of the juniors now. So if we can do that with a number of teams, it doesn't need to just be one. We could be going, well, look, we've got 20 guys showing promise. Getting it the earlier they can play, the better. Because the Scottish talent's there. If you look at what Stephen Robinson does at Motherwell, he bleeds them young. You know, they're getting game time, they're getting seasons under their belts, and it just kickstarts them, doesn't it? You know, because when they were 16, 17, they weren't as good as their Celtic contemporaries, but that very often they'll go on to have better careers.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
And I think in the majority of cases they're going on getting more top level football.
Mm-hmm. We'll come back to the international thing. You've touched on players who have got potential within this country. We might come back. We definitely will come back because we'll be looking at some of the international performances, the Celtic players. But before we do that, we'll have a look at some of the comments coming in. Thanks to everybody who's joining us via Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. Chango Chilemba is contacting us via YouTube to say Mikey Johnson could be. Well, I think Mikey's more left-sided, isn't he? So in terms of goals, he does pop in with a few. You know, he does contribute with some goals, but I don't see him as the centre forward. I do hope he comes back quickly because I think we're lacking a bit on the left at the minute, but I don't see him as a centre forward.
I think it's a position he could play, but maybe not with us because we wouldn't get the time to develop in it. You know, he's more left-sided, that's where we're going to develop him. And I think once he's played a number of games and he's looking good, he's getting goals, he's getting assists, he's going to be right. That's his position. At what point could you give him a run at centre to prove himself? Mm-hmm. Especially a lot of time you're only playing one forward. You know, it's not. Hopefully this season we go to two, but even then he's not. You know, he's so far down the pecking order for getting that spot. Yeah, absolutely. And another regular contributor to the show, Mick Nolan 88. Welcome to the show, Mick. I like that hat. Looks like Stone Roses lemon hat, which is fine. You'll fit in here. And he's saying that the players need it developed. And that, I think what we're talking about is finding a way of ensuring that these Celts are developed for two reasons. Either A, they don't get bored and then fly the nest to Bayern Munich or another club, or B, they're lost to the game and they end up, you know, there's a stump in their development, right? And between 18, let's say 21, I'm just using that as a key time in the development of the player going from a fantastic youth player to a first team player. And then you look around the lower reaches of the Scottish leagues and elsewhere, and there's loads of players who started off at Celtic. So we're pumping all this money into our youth development programme, and it is benefiting loads of other clubs Definitely. Elsewhere. But I would much rather see it, benefiting Celtic. I think it's always going to benefit clubs. If we've got a successful youth programme, it will also always benefit other clubs. Just by dint of numbers, you know, because you'll have them come through every age group, and there's only so many can make first team squad. So it's shown that we're doing the right thing that's benefiting them, but it's us getting the right number into our squad, isn't it? It is. I've got a great wee point coming through, Lawrence. I'm going to throw this one over to you. Right. KC65 Sunshine, who is commenting via Twitter. The stakes are too high these days for a manager trying to bring through homegrown talent. I think the one of the biggest examples of that was under the tenure of Ronnie Dyler, right? Yep. So he's trying to bleed youngsters in. He's been proved in time that the guys he was bleeding in were worthy of the games. I mean, we're talking Callum McGregor, Chris Ayer, Ryan Christie. Although Ayer and Christie didn't come through the ranks. Young players, also Kieran Tierney. He tried with others. I mean, that couple of the guys probably we won't see again, like Anthony Ralston. But as he was doing that, as a manager, he wasn't getting a lot of credit at the time. It's now that we look back, isn't it, that we see the impact these guys have had. Yeah, even go back to the 60s. Celtic didn't win a lot in the early 60s, but most of that team came through the rank not winning games for Celtic. The Lisbon Lions didn't happen overnight. No. They got a lot of game time with Celtic before they went on that run of success. Some of them were referred to as the Kelly kids. They were part of that crop, Billy McNeil, for example. Some of the older guys, There was only one not signed by Jimmy McGrory. So they're all... But Willie Wallace was the only one not signed by McGrory. Everybody else was signed by McGrory, although Steen brought all back from Birmingham City. He'd originally been at Celtic and was signed by McGrory. So you get back that they were all given game time under McGrory. Talking about Bertie Auld, and these are the things, again, that when you're speaking to ex-players, players who were there, and there is always this thought process that, Jock Stein knew he was coming to Celtic in advance of the time that he did. I think he probably did. There's a famous letter where someone writes to him at Easter Road and, is basically saying, I'll be there soon. Yep. And there was this kind of belief that it became almost like mythical, whereby they thought, Jock Stein had asked them to go and sign Bertie Auld, re-sign him from Birmingham. But when I spoke to Sean Fallon,
That's not the version of events I got from Sean, because obviously when Bertie signs for Celtic the second time, Jockstein is officially still the Hibs manager.
Yep.
Although he knows he's coming to Celtic, and Sean told the story, and I've got the interview. I've still got the interview that Jock was like, we got rid of him because he was trouble, tongue in cheek.
Aye.
Almost as if to say, "Are you bringing him back?"
I think it was a bit of truth, and there was a bit of unrealness, wasn't there?
Oh, but we like that. Yeah. That's why we love him.
Yeah, totally.
That's why we love Bertie.
Yeah,
as a player and as a man after his playing days were over. So there's again, you could effectively say he signed under the tenure of Jimmy McGrory.
Yep.
So the only player that didn't was Willie Wallace.
Well, McGrory signed him first time round at Celtic as well.
He speaks about that, doesn't he? Walking out to the park and getting offered less money than he would get at Partick Thistle.
You talk about less money. What about McGrory? Celtic tried and signed him with Arsenal, refused to sign him. So there's a striker we developed, comes back. Because he wouldn't sign for Arsenal, Celtic cut his money. So he was the lowest played member of the first team because he wouldn't sign for Arsenal.
Something occurred to me when we were banging on there a wee minute ago about the 90s there, Lawrence, and people bring out the old Celtic dad stuff. Do you think people in the 60s who were going on about the bad old days of the 40s got the same crack?
40s and the 50s? Probably, yeah.
Enjoy this, but remember the 40s.
Well, obviously, the league suspended for the war, then come back. There was only, I think, one team in the UK could run two full-time teams. And it was also a team from Glasgow who are no longer with us. For some reason, they could run two teams through the war. Every other club in the country couldn't. And that's UK-wide. So, yeah, Celtic had really poor 40s, 50s, almost get relegated.
They did.
The last game of the season. So, yeah, I think there was... They got a bit of stick. Scottish football was a bit more competitive. Stein at Dunfermline. Was it Willie? Who was it? Blake Kilmarnock had him playing with Willie, manager.
Before my time.
It's before your time, but Kilmarnock were a really good team as well. Then
yeah, of course.
you had Hibs.
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah, Dundee in the 60s getting into semi-finals European competition.
Yeah,
and a number of clubs were doing well in Europe, and Hibs done well a number of times in Europe. So the competitive edge certainly was there, and I'm pretty sure fans in the 60s. Always went hard back to the 40s when reminding the young whippersnappers, this is great, but enjoy it. Don't take it for granted.
65, was that the first trophy in 8-9 years or something?
It was the first trophy since the 7-1 game.
So it's, it's...
So a long time to wait. A long time to wait. And Gary Doonan, welcome back, Gary. There seems to be an emphasis on pace when it comes to strikers. Kenny, Charlie, George McCluskey, Craney, they weren't the quickest. I think that's a good point as well. Yep. We're maybe now looking for a different type of striker, aren't we? And, when you're looking at some of the guys that have come through and played the odd gamer here, Burchell had pace to burn.
Electric.
He had pace to burn. Didn't he get a bad injury, though? Lost half a yard.
Yep. Quickest hat-trick in European football.
Yes.
As well. So you could argue that he never really got his chance.
He didn't play many games, really.
Showed great promise, but who was he up against? He kind of realised he wasn't going to get his chance then. So he could have been a guy that perhaps could have made it at Celtic.
Well, it was one of the ones I think Burchell came on the scene. He's being referred to as the next Michael Owen, the Scottish Michael Owen. Remember all the headlines?
The 5-1 game. Burchell scores and it's like, this is the guy.
He had that burst of pace, didn't he? In behind the defence. But again, a bit like the player I mentioned, Owen, if you lose that tiny wee bit of pace, that's what your game's based on, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of
time, much less effective.
Less effective, but I think it comes down to game time again. He couldn't get enough game time with Celtic. If you lose the pace, you're going to need game time to learn, and he wasn't going to get it with us, I think.
Francie Dub LU on YouTube. Young Cameron Harper is starting to get noticed. Made the bench recently. Here's hoping it happens for the boy. There's nothing better than seeing a young kid coming through, getting games, definitely. Making the grade. We're going to be looking back at this 9/10/ wherever it leads us in a row era in the future, Lawrence, and we'll be talking about players like James Forrest and Callum McGregor and Kieran Tierney as being staple parts of the squad throughout this era, and they all came through the ranks.
You never get one club men. We've got two in the team. I know McGregor was out at Notts County on loan, but you're kind of thinking, actually, if you look round about, what other clubs of our size could say, well, actually, we've got staples, that one club men that played 8 seasons for us. Does it exist in modern football? It's not just a problem for Celtic, I think it's football wide, isn't it?
I remember speaking to Pat Stanton, who obviously had a tremendous impact when he came in to win the double. And Jockstein's last hurrah, 76, 77. But he's a Hibs legend. Of course he is. He's a Hibs legend. He's a club ambassador. And I was speaking to Pat Stanton when we were making the Nearly Mocking film, and he spoke of the importance of having that core of homegrown players in your team at all times. And he was going through all the successful sides. And he was talking about how Alex Ferguson did it. You know, he always had a core of guys that came through the ranks, and, you know, the Paul Scholeses of this world. And I mean, what do you call it? Fergie's fledglings then, the class of 92, homegrown players.
Well, you go back to Dealey was trying to get that Celtic way of playing right through the club, wasn't he? And if you've got homegrown players and you've got a way of playing it, they understand it. Another guy I think speaks great on it is Rudy Vata.
Yeah.
And he says he was so lucky. He came in it when foreigners were more or less just coming in, and he was probably the last guy who shared a dressing room, and everybody else was Celtic fanatics.
Yeah.
He says there was something about the club, everybody lived and breathed it. And he says he feels a bit sorry now that that's kind of lost, because he says, don't get us wrong, guys like Van Dijk follow Celtic, you know, Musa, but there's something, you know, they didn't grow up with it. You know, they didn't know it from, you know, they were born in at Celtic, and sorry to use that phrase, but you know what I mean? It's kind of, and right through, and players that we can readily identify with, you know, that have similar names to ourselves, you can go, you know, I went to school with that guy that's now playing for Celtic. So there is definitely something kind of lost about the club, but maybe it's kind of rose-tinted glasses or green-tinted glasses looking back that everything was better. I think it's football as a business has just moved on, and it'll really happen. We're in a good place. We've got two in a team that have been homegrown and through. It'd be great if we could get more.
Oh, it definitely would. But then if the results aren't racking up as they should, Lawrence, then there's always, during the transfer window, we as the fans have spent so much time talking about transfer targets, signings. We become impatient. Everything obviously is at the end of your smartphone. You can make your feelings known. The pressure does mount. I think people probably do realise the impact of social media on trends and the way that clubs feel. And I know a good example of this, actually, and it was through fan forums. And this was a club who are currently in the Scottish Championship. And it was mentioned as the manager was being relieved of his duties that fans were not happy. And they knew fans weren't happy because of certain forums. I mean, that shows you the impact of how fans are relating their feelings online.
I think that comes from Championship manager, if anybody plays it. You know, you could win cups, and if there's unrest in the fans, they would sack you. Definitely, you know, it's PR. People don't want the negative headlines. We need to do something. We're losing customers, we're losing goodwill. We need to change something. Everybody's entitled to an opinion, but sometimes do we support them enough? I mean, James Forrest is a whipping boy, but really he's a modern day Celtic legend.
Oh,
you know,
yeah, I agree with you.
When he looks back, if it looks like he'll be a one club player, and you're going, but every season he gets hammered by fans, and you're going,
exactly.
People are going to have bad games. How do we support them? Is it just hammer them, or you know? I think we're too quick to jump to extremes. You know, you're kind of going.
I think so. Kevin Graham makes the point. Kevin's not with us. He was in yesterday. He came along with fellow poet Victoria McNulty, and it was a fantastic week discussion that we had, and they were reciting poetry and everything, Lawrence. It was brilliant. And Kevin says, is it just down to pressure on the manager that strikers must produce right away, and we are hard on our own, like you say, James Forrest being the case in point? We talk about mentality, and these young developing players maybe are just seen as too risky. I think when you're going for 10 in a row, if you did the old thing that Fergie did that season when Hansen says you win nothing with kids, I think there would be a loads to say if Celtic didn't sign the 5 players they've signed and they threw in 5 kids from the development squad.
Anyone on the forums, we're having a brilliant season. Look at the money we've spent. You know, we're stepping up to the mark. And you're kind of going, well, that's your point exactly, isn't it? If it was 5 kids that come through and we'd spent no money, it would be like, what are we doing? We're putting a season in jeopardy. That's the reaction you're going to get. So
you would get that reaction.
There's a definite balance in it. I suppose when you're spending $5 million on a striker, you are buying goals. You're buying at a level. Someone
who's already, he's a finished article.
Yeah.
If you're buying somebody from West Ham for £5 million, he's already done the developing elsewhere.
Yeah.
You're buying the finished article now. He may increase in value because he'll probably get more games with us than he did at West Ham.
Yep.
He'll be put on the European stage, albeit this season. I'm hoping that it's Europa League beyond the playoff stages of that, Lawrence. But he is a finished article. And that was, again, the point I made in a previous podcast. We've started buying guys that we're not waiting for them to develop. We're buying them and they're finished. They're the real deal already.
Or even the developing guys we've got, like Musa and Odson. They're at such a level.
Mm-hmm.
They've still got a good bit of development to do, but you are buying in goals straight away.
You're buying a PSG guy, a PSG reserve striker for £9 million.
You've cut your risk on it. And it's the pressure, it's from fans, it's the pressure to win. I think it's back, if you look at a win percentage in games now, it's relatively unheard of. You know, and it's, you know, Facebook. 10 in a row, I don't think it'll change if we're going for 11. I don't think we'll go, oh, we've got the 10 now. Let's plead some guys. And racking up treble after treble, we can't even do it in the League Cup because we're going, you know what, let's go for another treble. Let's go for another treble. So you can't even look at one of the smaller games and go, I know, let's try them there. I know,
because there's no margin for error when you're, you know, trying to continue this domestic dominance that we've had. When you look at the European game and obviously the Motherwell game that followed, the criticism was all around not playing a striker, recognised striker. What was the other option if you didn't have a fit one on the bench? And I mean, Klimala looked fit enough the other night playing for Poland under 21s, but if you didn't have a fit one back in the day, you might have called on youth. And you're thinking of Peter Grant making his debut against Rangers, Danny Craney
scoring debut, Danny Craney. When he broke through, you thought he was going to have a great career as Danny Craney. He actually, was it 20 odd goals? Was it 21, 22 goals or something? He actually not a bad return, but we had such a good team then that he was one that kind of had to move out. You know, he came through the same kind of time as Nicholas.
There was a proper conveyor belt at that stage. Yeah,
definitely. It was. Yeah, Danny Crane was so exciting. You know, again, it's a homegrown player that breaks in. Mm-hmm. It could be that we've got more money for first team players now. You know, we've got a bigger playing squad. So that in itself is going to stop, you know, young players coming through. You look back kind of the 03 team, just about everybody was an internationalist. So was your bench, so was your reserve team. Mm-hmm. So you're at such a high level now that how do the young guys get in?
That's the question. And via Facebook, we're going back to Jerry Craney. He was a great striker for us at a bad time. You think about Jerry Craney and the impact that he made when he first came into the side. You look at some of the important goals he scored. He was part of that brilliant under-21 team for Scotland, remember? They had a great run in the European Championships. And you just got the feeling, Lawrence, that he was going to be a future Scottish internationalist. He was going to be a prolific goal scorer for Celtic for years to come. I think it all changed when Liam Brady came in, didn't it?
Yeah,
I can never remember him having, you know, I know he scored at Ibrox under Liam, but the first thing Liam Brady did was buy Tony Cascarino. And at that time, we already had 5 strikers, Jerry Craney being one of them.
Yeah, Jerry Craney, Jakanowski, Payton. So Jakanowski and Payton both scored on their debuts after Brady sold him. I think so did Tommy Coyne. He sold Coyne as well. It seems to be as soon as we sold a striker,
Coyne scored a few against us for Motherwell, didn't he?
Debuted for their other club, bang, they scored a goal. Yeah. And at a time we were struggling for goals under Brady.
It was Tranmere we sold Tommy Coyne to, wasn't it?
Yeah,
and it was 350 grand or something. And I think the idea that Liam Brady had was he was going to sell. There was a bid on the table for Coyne when we signed Cascarino, and it was from Man City, I believe, for about $500,000. But the deal fell through. So we end up with far too many strikers and we start selling them off. Probably surprisingly, the best striker in Brady's first season was Charlie Nicholas Mark II. He was quite prolific. I think he scored 25 goals that year.
Yeah, I mean,
but he was a good partner for Craney. Him and Craney worked well together.
Yeah, Charlie definitely football intelligence. He could feed the balls in, couldn't he? You know, he's just...
So ironically, the two best homegrown strikers we've had in the last 40 years ended up marrying up together for Liam Brady's debut season. Wasn't a great season, but I remember seeing most of the games that year. Phil C reminds us that Tommy tried to sign Ginola, or is it Ginola? Came into work one morning and they were sitting on a balcony drinking coffee. Phil, I remember reading the story about the signing talks. That's where the famous quip came from McCann. Can he do it at a wet Brockville on a Tuesday night?
He went to Newcastle instead, and then we played him in the friendly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so very close to signing him. Yeah,
and I mean the thing with Ginola, he was more of a wide player, wasn't he?
Yeah, more wide, definitely.
But
he went to Tottenham, was player of the season down there.
Yeah, he would have been a great signing. Yeah, he was gorgeous. So not as gorgeous as Samaras, but he was gorgeous.
You know, it's down to your taste, mate. you know, if that's what you like.
Listen, we're a broad church. Davy Boy, Clandonald, and you're commenting, Kevin, that definitely plays a part. If youngsters don't do the business in a couple of games, they're benched. It's true. We've seen it even in the last couple of seasons, guys making 1 or 2 appearances. It takes me on to the development, I guess, as well, of what seemed to be the biggest protege that came through since Islam Feruz, and it was Dembele Mark II, Karamoko. Now, there's chat, there's discussion, there's a bit of chat around him asking to be transferred.
Yep. He's
becoming frustrated. I'm sorry to break the news, but there's no way Dembele could get a game before James Forrest. No danger.
He's got to look at that and think, I'll be getting 5 or 10 minutes. You know, occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
The wee guy wants to develop, which is great, which is what we want, but we need to find a way to develop them. And this is a problem, we don't have a way to develop them sufficiently to keep them interested.
That's
so
right.
We're losing our best talents because they want to be the best.
Mm-hmm.
And other clubs are going, well, come here, this is how we develop players. You know, this is how we get them to the first team. And I think we just don't have that where we can go something similar or something as good.
If you've got a coach team that's in the pyramid, Lawrence, and you use the loan system and you get enough, you might have relationships with certain clubs,
yep.
2 or 3 players that you know share the same kind of philosophy of football. You didn't want to send a guy who comes from an attacking, free-flowing team as Celtic are, and that's the type of player that we're looking to develop and bring into the team, and then send them to a team of long ball, an ultra defensive team, because they're not going to learn their trade that they then need to bring back. But we've seen from Ayer, we've seen from Christie and McGregor, and there's been other examples, the benefit of loaning guys out. I mean, Ferguson used to do it as well. David Beckham spent some time at Preston.
Nothing, yeah.
You know, didn't John Terry go out to Nottingham Forest and he got some games
yep.
under his belt? And it's a great development. So I think it would be a combination of getting that coach team in the pyramid system, and you marry that up with quite a lot of loan deals and trying to get some kind of relationships with various clubs who you know can nurture the talent that you're sending to them.
I think it's getting the players out early enough. Mm-hmm. You've got to go, right, some players will be ready at 16 to go on loan. And I don't know how that's going to affect, cross-border rules and a professional contract. Maybe we've got an eye on that, or we could lose them for nothing because they're on a short contract, or we can lose them for buttons. So there may be an eye on that as well, going, if we put them out on loan, we need them on a longer contract. You'd need to kind of sit down and go, what's the risks here? But we definitely need to get them out when they're ready, when their development says, listen, you're holding me back. Or just before that going, right, we've got them out, you're getting game time. Mm-hmm. Surely there's places, low divisions in England, Scotland, places we can put them.
Or I think Jim Simonetti's mentioned a few times on the podcast, we've got friends all over the place. You look at one of the best talent spotters or developers of talent, and it was Ronnie Dyler. Love him or loathe him, I don't think anybody loves him. He's well loved, loved. But he could spot talent, Lawrence. Now, he's gone from Celtic, he's gone back to Norway, he's now in New York. Yep. Now, we will still have a relationship with him, I would guess, because he didn't leave under a dark cloud,
Yep.
So why not have some players developing with a team that is maybe a manager who's got a good relationship with the club?
Yeah, definitely. But we need to get them out there. We know we're spoiling them.
Mm-hmm.
What's Calvin Miller was tipped as one of the 10 best players in the world when he was younger?
Yeah.
He's now
trialling for Plymouth Argyle in a bounce game at Money Park the other week.
And we did put him out in a few loans, but it's probably too late by the time we felt we can loan you out. Because I think we kept him because, you're too good to loan. We really need you. We need you on the bench.
That's like the view that I think they've had with Dembele.
You're too
they
good
might
to loan,
not want to put him out for something to happen or for that philosophy to change. Or they're maybe looking at the situation, and I apologise for continually bringing up Islam Feruz, but the boy had about a dozen loan deals. He was getting sent all over the world by Chelsea, playing a few games here, a few games there. He popped up at Easter Road for a spell. How good is that? You want some kind of stability as well, don't you? So you look at McGregor, Ayer and Christie's deals. They were long deals on loan. So it gives them the opportunity to breathe a bit, rather than you're going there for a few games and you're getting loans out to another side on the other side of the country or even the world.
Feruz maybe kind of spoiled a few of the deals and went on. I think they were shorter because of what he'd done when he was there. Mm-hmm. Chelsea were perhaps hoping that he would stay longer at the clubs, but
Who was he with when he started slagging him off on Twitter one night? Remember? And he was swiftly freed of his duties.
Yeah.
But it's a great point of discussion, and we are getting a lot of good comments coming in. So let's have a look now at Twitter. It won't be long, says Gary Boy Tomo, till wee Dembele will be off. How long does he wait at Celtic to be given a spell? And that's the point. There's a guy who's 17 years of age. He's made his debut as a 16-year-old. He's now Celtic's youngest ever European performer or appearance when he came on against Cluj, it was, in Romania. And now he's nowhere. So what do you do with him? Well, he can't really play development football. Yeah, you don't want to loan him out because you might think that his development might not be best served elsewhere. What do you do with a player like Dembele who really is not ready to step into James Forrest's boots yet, you know?
We will either sell him by the end of this month, I think, because we'll lose him for nothing if we don't sell him, because he won't sign a new contract unless he's got a development plan. Mm-hmm. We've discussed that the club, the first team, is not going to get, I don't think he's going to get a suitable development plan that will satisfy him. So we either loan him, get him a longer contract, loan him out to someone that's going to develop him, or I think he's going to be off. We've probably left it too late. He's into last year his contract. Mm-hmm. You know, you're kind of looking and going, Celtic will be going, well, he's into the last year. We know he's unhappy with the development he's getting here. If we're going to send him out, we need to sign the contract. So have we left it too late?
It looks as though we might lose a player like, you know, a few years back, is the age of 13, making that well-publicised debut. Yeah. I think it was against Brendan Rodgers as well, actually, but he made his debut for the second string, as it's known. And from there, the progress was steep. You know, it was like playing for England, playing for Scotland, making his debut, sitting on the bench in the Scottish Cup final, making his European debut. Then he's hit a brick wall. And I think that concerns me a bit, because he's the type of player you're going to see him popping up in the Belgian league, ripping it up at some point in the Champions League, you know?
I think we're probably having this discussion about him a year too late. We should have put him out on loan last year when he had 2 years on his deal.
But then you think, we had Danny Lennon in last week. He's sitting next to Graham Diamond, who has worked on the international programme with Celtic. He's now the sporting director at Clyde. And you think, well, there's an opportunity there for Celtic to create this friendship, this relationship that we've discussed, and one that they were trying to do a couple of years ago with Dunfermline. The thing is, there's Dembele. Could you send Dembele to Clyde? Would that develop him? Would that aid his development?
He's going to get more development time there than he's currently getting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be better. Is it going to be development that satisfies Dembele?
Well, it really should at that age, though, Lawrence. He should be taking that as an opportunity to shine.
If it's only one player getting into that team, it maybe goes back to your point. If we could get 3 or 4 into the team at the same time that have a similar philosophy, that's it. But if he's one player and they're not playing football and it's getting lumped, maybe he's going to go, well, actually Bayern's got a better offer of development. You're going, yeah, it's an opportunity to sign, but if other clubs are going to go, well, we can actually develop you better than that. Mm-hmm. You know, he's going to have competing offers that he's got to look at and go, Celtic's got to offer something at least as good. That he can see that pathway.
This spills into another conversation we'll have at some point during this podcast, even in relation to the international weekend that we've had and the disappointment and, you know, a really uninspiring Scotland side. I've got to say, I have been a massive fan of Stevie Clarke. I really have. I've liked what he did at Kilmarnock. I know that he was earmarked at some point over the last few years as being a possible Celtic manager. That was by the club. And in actual fact, I think he has been interviewed at some stage for the job. I'm not saying he should be a future Celtic manager. He's gone into the Scotland manager's role. I don't think there was many arguments. There was plenty of arguments that Strachan was relieved of his duties too early. But when Clark got that job, I think, you know, people are fairly happy. And then you're looking at it and you're seeing some of the reaction today from, you know, credible journalists saying that we simply don't have the talent. I don't think I agree with that. I don't think it's an issue of talent. You're looking at some of the players who are fleeing the nest to go to Bayern Munich. You've got Aaron Hickey and a tug of war between Bayern Munich, Bologna, various other clubs. We do produce the players, Lawrence. How come when it gets to the point of putting an international team together that we're unable to do that with any kind of degree of effectiveness?
How many games has Clark had with Scotland? You know, are we rushing too quick to judge the manager now? Are we seeing journalists are putting pressure on the manager going, you know, how many games? I saw him after, not last night's game, the previous one, and saying, well, I need to try a different system. I need to see what system the players can play. So he's obviously getting to know his players. So how quickly are we looking for a return? You touched on Strachan relieved his duties too early. He's actually last year in charge of Scotland. Phenomenal results. A great win ratio. And then we relieved him. Previous to that, his first couple of years you were going, right, they were a bit up and down, but he actually seemed to then get a winning formula and know the players.
He started playing Lee Griffiths, didn't he?
Yeah, but he got a winning formula and knew the players. And Scotland went, actually, we're going to take the job off you. You're going, well, wait a minute, the guy's now proving that he's doing it, and now you take the job off him to repeat the cycle?
I think there was a period there where he was on to a winner if he played half a dozen Celtic players. From Craig Gordon to Scott Brown, Armstrong was part of that for a spell, Griffiths.
Yep.
You had Tierney, you had McGregor, you had about 7 players.
That goes back to your point of players knowing each other and knowing the way to play. So you've got a nucleus there of players that are used to winning, know how each other play and have the same philosophy. So it's something that's easier to build on rather than having 11 different players for 11 clubs. It's maybe, 8 or 9 clubs. What Clark's having to face just now, he's going, right, how do I get them to work together? What's the best system? What system can these players play together? So yes, Strachan who's perhaps lucky or wise going for Celtics winning everything, they proved they work as a unit.
Took his time to do that, and I mean, Christie was part of that, but he was away on loan at the time as well. Yeah. But we had 7-8 players as part of that squad, and it made sense if they were winning everything in front of them, and they had that mentality as playing as part of a team. And I always remember Venables tried to bring in at England a kind of club side mentality.
Yep.
And a lot of the players really related to that, and they had a good side in Euro '96. I think they got to the semi-finals.
Yeah,
that albeit it was in England at the time, which is always an advantage. But they had a good side, and it was like a club mentality.
Yep.
I look at that Scotland team now. You're maybe plucking one player from a club down south, and it seems a bit fragmented to me.
I don't think Clark's had any time to develop them a club mentality. I mean, how many games is he going to get to develop that club mentality? It comes down to time again. He's got to bring them in. He's got to find his best players and what systems they can play.
You need to, don't you think you need 2 campaigns as an international manager?
Well, yeah, at least. Well, look at Strachan. After 2 campaigns, Strachan started to nail it, didn't he?
Yeah.
And then we get rid of him, which you kind of got, but he's performing well. Now we'll get rid of him. It was a crazy decision. Can't remember who replaced him and why he was chosen. But
no, I don't think it was the right decision. And when we look at the internationals that we've seen over the last few days, I think it was great to see Shane Duffy scoring. That was brilliant.
Yep.
But we've seen a few other goals. What about El Yunusi's finish? Did you see how that technique was incredible?
Yeah, it's there's definitely a player in there. We're not getting the best out of him just now, but it's definitely a player in there. You can see why he's went for big money in the past.
Are we playing him in the wrong position, Lawrence?
I think it's Jim Simonette comes on here. He made a point in it the other a week or 2 back about the balance of the side. When Celtic went to 3-5-2, we got a better balance, and I think it's the team's been a wee bit out of balance for a while. Whether that's a left back issue, left centre back issue, I think it's just the players interacting. There just seems to be a bit of unbalance there. So hopefully Duffy coming in and maybe getting a left wing back or whatever, a decent left mid in, or whoever can sort that imbalance out, and perhaps that'll bring it better out in Elyounoussi.
I think as well when you're looking at Edouard. Now, I don't have the stats to hand, but his France underaged goal scoring record is frightening.
Scored again, eh?
It's almost like a goal a game.
Yeah, scored again.
Unreal.
You're looking and going.
And you're looking at that, and I had the same feeling when Dembele was prolific for the under-21s and he was at Celtic, and I thought to myself, all it takes is that he's going to get a cap for France. He's going to get a cap for France, and then his value goes through the roof.
Well, what are they talking? Contract negotiations. The rumour is he wants a £45 million release clause in there. I think that would be cheap.
Well, I think when you're looking at how much we let our star men go for in the past, and then the secondary transfer,
yep,
and how much they're actually worth once they go into this different level, we need to be demanding more than we've got for the likes of Van Dijk.
I think it's 45 million hitting the ceiling. They'll play for the Scottish League. I don't know, because other smaller leagues seem to be able to get bigger fees than us. The guy that is at Hearn, and he talks about darts and just how we market the Scottish League, how the SFA and SPFL do it. We don't market effectively. Per head of capita, Scotland's got more football fans that attend games than any other country in the world. So you're looking and going, he's saying, you just don't market this right. You've got a poor TV deal. You just don't play to your strengths. And I think a lot of that hits the transfer fees. So, 45 million's prop, it's biggest fee we'd ever got if that's going to be his release clause and he does move. But surely, with his goal scoring record for France, we should be looking at more. We're talking about buying goals. Every team buys goals. And this guy's
he's unbelievable.
Goal scoring phenomenal.
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, the release clause, the one that I always remember was Ryan Gould's, wasn't it? The sell-on clause was, 30 million?
Yeah.
So it doesn't always live up to that.
Player of the season.
Aye.
And he's come up.
Yep.
24 now. Mm-hmm. So he's come up from second division Portugal, won the league with that team, and he was player of the season. So I don't know, we maybe not hit a last of gold. Because he's still on loan there, isn't he?
Well, I think I'd love to see him flourish, because again we're talking about international football, and what happens with the international game is we go through periods where if the fans lose a bit of faith obviously in the manager, and I think that's happening at the moment, then the despondency around it, people lose interest. They lose interest. I'm going to be totally honest here. Leading up to that international break, I wasn't that enthused. I didn't watch any of the two games. Right. I didn't watch any of the two Scotland games. I'm a football fan, right, who talks about football every single day, Lawrence. Is there not something wrong when somebody like me completely loses interest in the Scottish national team?
So if the SFA's only answer is change the manager, you're like, how are you marketing the Scottish management team? Well, obviously we can't get any Hampden just now, COVID, etc. But before that, what were they charging? 30 quid a ticket? Mm-hmm. Cheapest ticket? How are they making this game accessible and you want to go? They're pricing a lot of fans out of it. A full Hampden with an atmosphere. It's not the best team in the world, but they could fill it for 10, 15 quid a ticket. How much genuine cost did the SFA have that they need to charge 30 quid a ticket? So, yeah, I think some of it comes down to marketing. We don't market a product very well. That's the leagues and the Scottish team. The press generally seem to focus on negative. They don't focus on the positive. I mean, after what Clark achieved at Kilmarnock, you've got to give him time, surely. And you've said 2 campaigns, but every newspaper headline is, he didn't do it this game, or, the team weren't brilliant. They won. They did win. It wasn't a great performance against Czech, but they won. And I think they're 45th in the world, we're 51st or something. I'm not exactly sure in the stats. So we beat a higher ranked team. People go, I was the Czech second team. And they're decent players, And
Dykes got in the score sheet, Lawrence. Let's not forget that. I'm not... he's done well in his first 2 games. I'm not the biggest fan of Dykes as a striker, but, he's come on and done it. You can't argue with it. He's scoring goals for us already. Playing with a striker, a big striker that puts his sail about it and makes runs, it seemed to work. I'm not too sure what competition there is up front for him. This is a problem. Now, Lawrence, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about Celtic for the last 55 minutes. And thank you to everybody who's got involved via Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. Lawrence will be on the ACSOM Bulletin every Tuesday. It goes out every single weekday at 12:30, and it's always great to engage with you. We can't always get through all your comments, but keep them coming in. We'll join you again at 12:30 tomorrow for a Celtic State of Mind. Thank you all for joining.